You are losing clients and leaving money on the table because you don't know how to connect tools that don't play nice together. APIs fix that. In today's video, I will show you how to use APIs with Make.com to build automations that no one else can. Whether you are freelancing or building your agency, this is the skills that separates average from premium and gets you paid like an expert. Let's get started. Most automators hit a wall when a client asks, "Can you automate this?" If it's not in the module list, they panic, but not you. Not after today. APIs are the cheat code to connecting anything to Make.com, and I'm going to show you how to do it step by step. How APIs work in plain English, how to test them like a pro using Postman, and how to build automation that fetches live news and email it out, all inside of Make.com. By the end of this video, you will have a new skill that makes you irreplaceable and puts you ahead of your competition. Let's jump in. First of all, before I share my screen and we get into building our automation, let's start by understanding in plain English what APIs are. Let's keep it simple. APIs are how apps talk to each other. Think of it like ordering food at a restaurant. So there is you, the customer. Then there is the API, which is the waiter who takes your order to the kitchen. The kitchen is the app or service doing the work. You send the waiter, the API, a request like, "I want pizza." The waiter passes it to the kitchen makes it, and then the waiter brings it back to you. APIs are just messengers. And just a quick reminder, if you want to shortcut all of the hard work and you want access to the scenarios, the blueprint, everything that I'm showing in this video, I'm giving it away. Check the link below. Let's begin by understanding the two most important parts of API. The first one is API keys. This is like your unique password or ID to access the API. Without it, the API won't recognize who you are and your request will be rejected. The second one is the endpoint. This is the specific location where you send your request. Think of it like a door leading to a specific service in a hotel. For example, if you want the latest news, the endpoint might look like this. You have the link, the URL, which is news.api.org/v2/ This is now the endpoint. Top headlines. You will see later that we have, for example, all news or top headlines. This represents the endpoint which we are trying to get access to. To make a valid request, you combine an endpoint with an API key. And any extra information like which country's news you want to get, what are the keywords for the headlines you want to retrieve, or what are the dates of the news you want to fetch. Now that we understand API keys, let's get one for the News API. Visit the News API website, newsapi.org. Sign up with your name, email, and password. This website will give you an API with a limited amount of requests that we can do a month, and it will let us fetch news using an API. Once you sign up, you will receive an API key. So it will look like this. You will have an API key, and just copy this API and save it for later. Before using an API, it's crucial to read the documentation to help us understand how to use properly the API for that specific service. This is like the instruction manual for a Lego set. So I'm going to navigate to documentation. To the left, we have this menu, and I'm going to navigate to searching for news articles. And the first thing I'm going to look for is the base URL. This is the starting point for all the requests. So we can see here we got an example for a full API and how to use that, and we are going to use it later. But first of all, let's find the base URL. So we can see here at this part, we have HTTPS, then we have newsapi.org/v2. This is the base URL, and what comes after that, you can see it says everything. If I scroll down, then I'm going to see another example where after the V2, it says top headlines. So you can see that the first part of the URL is still the same. This is the base URL. Then after that, we have the endpoint, which is the everything or the top headlines we saw earlier. These are like extensions to the base URL, pointing to a specific service. For example, /everything searches for articles, while top headlines retrieves major headlines. Next, we have the parameters, and usually they come after the question mark. So we can see here an example to these parameters. So you have Q, which is basically the search term you want to search for. In this case, it's Apple. Then you have the from, which is the from date. And then you have the sort by popularity, and then comes the API key, which is your unique API that you copied earlier. So if you look here in our example, you can see that this is how this looks like. This is the full string. So let me show you here in my browser. You can see here the full string. So we have the base URL. Let's delete the get. We are going to talk about that in a second. But we have the base URL. Then we have the endpoint, which is basically the service that we are trying to request. Then we have the endpoint, which is the service that we are trying to get. And then we have the question marks and all of the different parameters. So we have Q, the search term, we have the from, we have the sort by, and then we have our unique API key. Lastly, we have the response. This is the data the API sends back. Usually, it's in JSON format. So we can see here that it says the status is okay, meaning that our request worked properly. Then we have total results, and then we have these curly brackets, and for each article, we are going to get the author, the title, the description, the URL, URL to image, and we have a lot of data that we can get from our API request. The way that a JSON works, it basically has a key, which is the field that we are getting, and then the value inside of that field. So title, and then the value of the title, the description, and then the value of the description. It's just a way of sending data through the web. We understand what is an API key and what is an endpoint. Then we saw that we have the parameters that we need to also include in our request. Now we need to talk about another super important concept: get versus post. These are the two most common HTTPS modules you'll encounter. The first one, the get method, is a method used to retrieve data from the API. Think of it like reading information. For example, fetching news articles with these requests. So we just saw this string, and in this case, if you have a look here at the parameters, you'll see that I said to the API request, I want you to retrieve all the news, everything related to OpenAI. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to make an API request in a get method to fetch everything related to OpenAI from the news API website. The second method is the post method. This method is used to send data to the API to create or update something. Think of it as writing or submitting information. For example, if I want to create an automation that posts this news to all of my social media platforms, which we are going to do in another video, then I'm going to need to use a post method so I can send the article that I want to post to all of the different platforms. And just as before, when we saw the response of our API, we will use a JSON format. For example, in this case, we are going to send the name and the email of the client or the lead or whatever we want to send to our API. In this tutorial, we will focus only on the get since we are fetching data. In the next video, we are also going to use the post method. Okay, so now we understand APIs keys, endpoints, and we understand that there are two methods, the get method and the post method. So now we want to get into testing the API with Postman. What is Postman? Postman is a free tool that lets you test APIs by sending requests and viewing responses, like a playground for experimenting with the APIs. So now we want to test the news API in Postman. So open Postman and create a new request. Next, I want to choose the method. So I'm going to choose get, but you have this drop down and you'll see that we have the post, put, patch, delete, and other methods that we will not cover in this video. What I want to do now, I want to enter the URL here. So this is a URL that I copied from the documentation on News API. So let's break it down. First of all, we have the base URL, and then you'll see that if I click para, I'm going to get all of the parameters that we have in our URL. So it's the same. It's an alternative way of looking at the data. So first of all, here under key, the first thing, let me take this one down. Here under Q, I'm going to type OpenAI. So I want to retrieve all the information, all the news article. And if you have a look here at the endpoint, you'll see that it's everything. So I want to retrieve all the news related to OpenAI. We can see that I'm retrieving everything from the end of December, and I can update that to whatever date I want. Sort by popularity. If I go back to the commentate, you'll see that it's a way of sorting. Hold on, let me find it. Here under endpoints, if I click everything, you can see here all of the request parameters, and you can use some parameters that I did not use. But if I scroll down, you'll see that we have here sort by, and you can see popularities is the articles from popular sources, and publishers come first because I want to retrieve the main articles here. Then comes a crucial part. Under API key, I want to paste my API key that I copied earlier. So you should replace let me show you this section that you have in here. Instead of API key equals, you want to replace it with your own API key. Then we have page size and sort by, which you already, okay, I can see that it's duplicated, so I'm going to delete this one, the first one. Great. Now I want to test it. Let's see if we are getting articles. So I'm going to click send, and let's see what we got. We got here a response that first of all, it says, okay, status okay, so it means that we did receive articles back. Under total results, we can see we got a lot of the results, so let's try to change that. I want to retrieve information from, let's say, from yesterday. So I changed here the date, and if I click send, you'll see now that we have 78 articles. And here you'll see the first article, so we have the source, the ID, the name of the article, the author, the title, description, all of the details of the first article. Here comes the second article, we have the third one, and then we have the fourth one. The reason why you see only 4 articles out of 78 is because of this parameter that is named page size. If you go to the documentation under the everything endpoint, you'll see that you have here the page size is the number of results to return per page. So you see why it's crucial to check the documentation so you can figure out what parameters you should use and just navigate by your own. Okay, now one more thing before we actually get into building our automation. Sometimes API responses can look messy. For example, have a look in here. It's very hard to understand what's going on here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this response and I'm going to go into a JSON formatter. So I'm going to open a new tab. I'm going to search for JSON formatter. There are a lot of great formatters out there. You can just use the first one, paste here your JSON, and then you will get a format that is a little more readable and it's easier to read. So I can close here all of these different articles and we can, for example, open the first one. Let's close the source, and here I can see all of the keys and what's inside of those keys, the values of those keys. Okay, there is one more thing I want to talk about so you can fully master everything and understand everything. Headers, query parameters, which we already saw earlier, and the body. First, we have headers. Headers provide extra information about your request, like specifying the format of data being sent or received. For example, content type tells the server we are working with JSONs. This ensures the server knows how to interpret the data correctly. Don't worry, you are going to see that in a minute inside of make.com, and everything is going to make sense, I promise you. Then we have the query parameters. These refine your request and add it to the URL after the question marks. So we already saw it earlier. We have here, after the base URL, the parameters, OpenAI, the date, and the sort by. So we already covered, and we are going to see that in Make as well in a second. But this helps us get exactly the results that we are looking for. And lastly, the body contains data you send in post request. Since we are using a get method, we won't need a body for this tutorial. But in our body, we can send, for example, a JSON specifying the title, the article, everything that we want, and post it to our social media. We are going to do that in the body. In this case, we don't need that. We are going to use only the header to specify the content type, so the system knows we are working with JSONs. And then we're going to specify the query parameters, which are the search term that we are using, it's the page size, the from date, etc. If you got so far, congratulations, you're already ahead of many other people, and we covered all of the boring stuff, so now it's time to get into the practical stuff and build our automation. Let's get into the fun stuff and automate fetching news articles and sending them via email for like a weekly newsletter, for example, letting you know all of the news related to whatever you want to learn about. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to name this automation. So I just named it News Fetcher Automation. Next, we want to add an HTTP module. This is the module that will allow us to make an API request. So I'm going to click here, make a request. Perfect. Here we want to type the base URL. In our case, I'm going to type the base URL and also the endpoint to our API. So we have here newsapi.org/v2, and then we have the endpoint for our API request as we tested earlier in Postman. Next, we can do two things. We can either copy from Postman the entire URL and paste it this way, or alternatively, we can add query strings and move all of these different parameters to query strings. It is easier to manage, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy everything. So let's copy the first one, which is the Q, and the value is OpenAI. And let me copy the from date. Let's add another parameter. So let's just first of all copy all of the parameters. So we have the sort by, and next we have the API key, and we have also the page size. Great. So now I'm just going to copy all of the values. So we copied earlier the search term. Now we want to copy the date, and later on we're going to do it dynamically. But from now, just copy the date. Now we want to copy the sort by, which is the popularity. Now we want to copy our API key. Here, the API key. And lastly, the page size, which is just the number 4. Great. And let's remove everything that comes after the endpoint, which is basically the question mark. Great. So this is, you can use either way, just like we did here in Postman, the entire URL, or you can set here the URL, the base URL, the endpoint, and then manage everything from the query strings. It's the same. Next, we want to add to the header content type. So we will let the API know that we are using a JSON format. So the value of the content type, because it could be text, for example. So we want to specify that we are going to use a JSON format. So you can see here we have content type and application/JSON. And I want you to make sure that you are not confusing the headers with the parameters. The headers, it's the metadata. It's basically explaining the system what you are sending and how to handle that. And the parameters is actually the data that you are sending. Lastly, we have, if I scroll down here, you can also specify a body. We are not going to use body today, so we just leave it blank as it is. Okay, now let's fix the date, because we want to receive always all the news from, let's say, 2 days ago. So I'm going to paste here, and I want to show you the format of what I'm using. So basically, the first thing I'm using is the now. So we retrieve the date of today. Then I'm adding days -2. So I go 2 days ago. And then for format date, I'm changing the format to make sure that I'm going to retrieve the data in the following format of year, month, and date. Great, so let's click OK and let's test it. I'm going to right click and then run this module only, and let's see if it's working. Perfect, so the first thing I'm looking for is to see if we got a 200 status code, which basically is a code that represents that the request was complete and everything went fine, everything is okay. And if I go to data, you're going to see here, this is the full JSON that we got back, but you can see it specifies the name of the article, we have the URLs here, so we have all of the information that we saw earlier on Postman. So everything works perfect. Now the next thing we want to do is to parse the JSON. Why do we need this step? This response from the HTTP request is in JSON format, which contains nested objects like articles. Why this structure is excellent for sorting data, Make cannot directly use the nested data unless we parse it. The parse JSON module will transform the JSON response into a format that Make can easily work with in just a couple of steps. In simple words, this module processes the JSON response and breaks it down into separate items, creating individual entries for each article in the array. So if you have a look in here, everything is nested. It's very hard to get anything from the way it's structured at the moment. So now we want to add a parse JSON model. So I'm going to type parse JSON, and now we want to map the data output from the HTTPS module to the input field of these modules. So I'm going to choose the, I think it was the data. Yeah, I think it was this one. Let me just make sure. If I go back here and under data, yeah, great. I just mapped the data output from the HTTPS module and we added it here. And now let's test it. So first of all, I'm going to the HTTP make a request module, and I'm going to copy all of the data. After that, I'm going to run this module only, the JSON parse format, and I'm going to paste it in here. So this is the data that we are going to send into our parse JSON. I'm going to click OK, and we can see that we got under the output articles, and I want you to have a look now how clean and easy to handle it looks like. So we have all of these collections inside of our output. So we have article 1, article 2, article 3, and article 4. So it's way easier to understand and manage than everything that we saw earlier in the HTTP module. Okay, lastly, we want to email these news, these articles to our email. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to add a new module here. I'm going to type email and I'm going to choose send an email. Next, you need to choose your connection. So we saw that earlier many times in our videos, or you need to create a connection if you don't have it. Next, we are going to go to the to, and since I'm going to send it now only to myself, I'm just going to add a recipient and manually type my email. So I'm going to add here my test email. So it's going to be sent to here, Kevin Workshops AI1gmail.com. Perfect. Now we want to type in a subject line. So what I'm going to type is top news. And now we want to put a date in here. So let's search here for the now. I'm going to add the now variable. Great. Now we want to format date, and here they are giving us how to use it. Let's close this one. Great. And we want to type in like this. Let's close it first of all. And we want to type year, we want to type the month, and we want to type the date. And great. So what we're expecting to get in our subject line is the top news for today's date. Okay, so lastly, we want to type the body of the email, and I'm just going to copy that from the blueprint that I prepared for you guys, and I want you to have a look here at something. You can see that it's black. The reason why it's black is because this template works with my other blueprint, and the number of the module, I want you to have a look here at something. You can see it says 10. In my blueprint, the module of the parse JSON number was 10. In this case, you can see it's 3. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy again this template. I'm going to paste it into a notepad. In my notepad, I'm going to fix the number of the module, and then I'm going to paste it back in this module. Okay, so you can see now that I changed the number of the module from 10 to 3. The color represents here the parse JSON's color, and let me just fix it a bit so you can understand what I have done here. Okay, so we have here the hey, and then we have the next line, which is here are the latest news. We are using the HTML to space everything. Then we want to create another space. And then we're going to get the following structure. We are going to get 3 articles. For each one of them, we're going to get the title, and we are going to get the URL of the article. So we are getting in our email the title and the URL, and then if I want to learn more about the news, I can just click the URL. And I want you to see what happened here. Because of the fact that the result in our parse JSON is an array, we have a few, you can see here a few articles. When I'm choosing the results here, let me just show you how. This is the long way, so I'm just going to show you the long way, and I did it earlier in the quick way just to show you everything faster. But what I could have done here is if I want to get, for example, the title, then I'm going to the previous module and I'm choosing under articles the title. And you can see here that we have these square brackets. If I choose here the number 1, what I'm going to get as a result is going to be the title of the first result. So it's going to be here, this one. So if I want to call a specific result, I need to put the right number in there. So let me delete this one. And basically what we are going to get here is out of the 4 articles, we are going to get the first 3 of them. And here you can see number 1, I'm getting the title, then I'm getting let me just style it again. I'm getting here the URL, and the same here, the same goes here, URL and URL. So basically I'm going to get for each one of the news, I'm going to get the first title and the first URL, the second one and the third one. Let's save it and let's test that. Okay, so it seems that I fucked up earlier and I did not show you the screen, my screen. So just once again, here is the result. Here are the different articles, and what I was showing here under articles, there are the different numbers. So now let's test everything. So I'm going to click run once, and what I'm expecting, if everything works fine, is to see a new email in my inbox, and you can see it here, me, top news, this is today's news, and here I can see okay, I need to space it again here, over here, but you can see the first article, the second article that starts here, we just need to fix the spacing in our HTML tags. And here we can see the third article with the URL and the title.